Welcome to the Social Work Rants podcast, providing a platform for social workers to share their stories. The podcast covers a wide range of topics, including mental health, social justice, policy, and the day-to-day realities of the profession. Season 10 will continue to focus on the intersectionality of mental health and finances. Hope you enjoy. Hello, social workers, mental health professionals, and change agents. Welcome to another episode of the Social Work Rants podcast. I'm your host, Bass Moreno. Salutes a todos, greetings, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, tapping in wherever you are watching or listening to this podcast. I appreciate all the love and support. Welcome to season number 10, year number 5 of this podcast thing. We're going to keep trucking along. Shout out to everybody that's been watching the podcast on YouTube, that you could hit the red subscribe button, or of course, however you listen to audio, the audio platforms all over the world. Shout out to everybody. So this podcast is not to be used as a substitute for therapies. As a disclaimer, if you need help, get the help that you need. There's 988, 911. If you have a therapist, call your therapist. If you have a psychiatrist, call a psychiatrist. Just get the help that you need. It's okay not to be okay. And this podcast is brought to you by Bass Moreno Consulting, providing financial education for people of color in the sandwich generation who are struggling with caregiving and finances. If that is you, caring for an older adult and have kids 17 years or younger, you are a member of the sandwich generation. I'm offering a free 25-minute consultation. For more information, go to bassmorenoconsulting.com or DM me, go to Bass Moreno Consulting on Instagram, and get this business popping off. If you're watching the YouTube, no, I did not get a black eye or anything like that. I'm wearing these fake tattoo looking stickers, eye black, representing my college football team that forgot to take off prior to this recording. So I'm gonna keep it on and rep my football team. And by the time this episode airs, I'll be saying college football national champions. So shout out to my Notre Dame Fighting Irish. So my guest at this time, Elise Lash. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. We're gonna talk about ecotherapy. Been reading about it. It's very interesting, especially kind of timely. We having this episode with a new administration coming in, new but not new. We got a second, the second coming of Agent Orange, who I like to say, coming in, and Mr. Anti-climate denier, and already causing ruffling some feathers with Greenland and Panama and Canada and Mexico again. Just a whole hot mess. And
He's notorious for stirring the pot. Some people love that, but I don't know.
But yeah, let's focus on the ecotherapy. At least let people know before we talk about the ecotherapy bill. What is that? Let people know who you are and what you do in the space.
Sure. I am really, really excited to be here to share a little bit about myself and my background. I know that your podcast is designed for social workers, but I'm so biased because I love being a social worker. And I've been practicing as a social worker for about 13 years now. I'm originally from Virginia, but I'm both based in Boston, Massachusetts now. I've been up in Boston for about coming on 9 years, which is crazy to say out loud. But my training as a social worker started when I was in Virginia. I went to school at George Mason University in Virginia. I studied clinical social work there for my undergrad. And honestly, when I showed up to my first intro to social work class is when I was like, where have y'all been my whole life? Like, these are my people, the core values of the profession, the commitment to racial justice, the commitment to serving people who are the most marginalized in our community, all just aligned with me and my own being. And I'm really, really glad to have found social work. because people are like, Elise, you should study psychology. But I was like, no, 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 no. Nothing against our psychology brothers and sisters, but I really, really have come to love just so many pieces of social work profession, even though we have our problematic pieces,
Yes.
right? Like I think there's a lot of work to decolonize some parts of this profession, but overall, I feel really proud to be a social worker. I came to Boston to study my master's degree in social work. I went to Boston College. And from there, I've just been rocking in the field. I've worked in a lot of different settings. I worked in foster care and adoption. I worked in a hospital. I worked in in-home family therapy. The first half of my career, I worked with just mostly kids and families. And then over the past 5 years since the pandemic, I sort of shifted gears to work with adults for the first time exclusively. I worked for a group therapy practice for a few years until 2.5 years ago, which is when I started my own private practice, which has been a steep learning curve, but very empowering, something that I feel really, really proud of. It is truly my heart work. I absolutely love my work. I absolutely love my clients, and absolutely love how my practice allows me to practice in a way that is aligned with my own values and my own priorities and my own style. And I also work part-time at Boston College still. I thought I graduated and would never go back there, but they got me back because I work as a field advisor for the School of Social Work. I support a few students who are currently in their MSW program, which is really fun. My students are brilliant. Shout out to them. And I also work part-time in another little hustle where there's a program in Massachusetts called the LEAP program. It stands for Licensure Equity and Achievement Program, and it's a grant that is for folks who work for community health centers who are trying to pass their licensure exam. You probably are familiar with there's a big discrepancy about who passes the licensure exam in social work in
Yes.
particular. And basically it says like if you are over 50, if you're a person of color, or if English isn't your first language, then like the odds of you passing the licensure exam is really, really tough. And so Massachusetts realized that. And so they created this big grant and this program to connect coaches to
Mm,
prospective folks who are trying to pass their exam. And so I work as a coach. And so I support folks to give them study skills and help them to manage anxiety and doubt around passing the exam to get them licensed so that they can jump and launch into their professions. Because it's annoying to me that the license holds a lot of people back. But
yes.
it's a baby step. I think the exam itself is the problem, to be honest with you, but we're learning how to make the exam work for us and hack it so that we can get the license. But those are some of the places that I occupy currently. But a lot of my work as a clinical social worker has been centered around supporting people who identify as people of color. Most of my clients now identify as women. Most of them identify as women of color. Most of them find me because they either have concerns with anxiety. I specialize in supporting folks with anxiety. I love talking about our nervous systems and how anxiety in fact impacts our bodies. Um, and I also love talking to folks about racial trauma in particular. So how the ism of racism impacts our own mental wellness and our trauma. And then just recently, in the past 3-ish years, is when I've sort of added the specialization in learning a ton about ecotherapy,
Mm,
which I can talk about a little bit more in a minute. But that has also been just a really powerful piece of things that I've been building clinically and professionally for years, but just feels like it's like the cherry on top for me when it comes to my own style, my own passion. I myself love movement and being outdoors. Another identity that I'm really proud of is being a runner. I lead a running club here in Boston, and
oh, nice.
I just love moving my body and thinking about the physical and mental health benefits of running and being outside in particular all year round. We had a run this past Wednesday in Boston, and it was feels like 2 degrees outside. And I felt like I was crazy to be out there, but there was 30 of us and we were just out there running the streets of Dorchester here in Boston, and it was intense. But to me, especially during the winter, is when I'm learning that we need to be outside in order to combat things like seasonal affective disorder, even though
Absolutely.
we just want to like,
Mhm.
hermit in the house and stay in, but then we need the fresh air, we need the trees all year round. And so um yeah, I've just been learning a lot about ecotherapy, and I'm excited to share some of my learnings with y'all today.
Well, before we get into what exactly is ecotherapy, I'm curious to know. You mentioned the students at the MSW program are also like what are you seeing in terms of the students? What do they want to get into? What is the
Mhm.
university like focusing on? Like what tracks do they have in case whoever listens who inspires to want to be a social worker? Like what does that program kind of
Yes.
entail?
Great question. Great question. And it's the program that I went to for myself for a master's program. So not too long ago, about 8 years ago is when I graduated, and now I'm sort of on the mentor side for folks who are currently in the program. Boston College is really a special place. I love, recently they started this program called the Black Leadership Initiative, where it's a cohort for people who identify as people of color that really thinks about how to support the mental health needs of the African diaspora in particular. And what that means is really understanding sort of the deep root causes of mental illness and how racial trauma impacts the body and how we can heal holistically is some
Mm,
of the things that I really am excited to see sort of evolving in curriculum for higher education because not all programs offer classes in those type of topics, but I love that Boston College does. But my students themselves, they are the future. They are such visionaries. They care so deeply about issues around social justice in a way that I didn't even think twice about by the time I was in their stage of their profession. But I think that I have a lot of respect by the way how they don't tolerate like the mediocre pieces of the field. Like they want high quality care, they want innovation, they want sustainability. They want to be paid. They want to endure their work in this field. And to me, each time I host a class or I host a meeting or a conversation with any of my students, I just feel really excited about the passion that they bring, the fresh eyes, the fresh perspectives, the ways that they tease about burning down the system to be able to rebuild it can sometimes sound extreme, but I think it's important. It's so important. And I get really excited to think about welcoming them as my colleagues very soon once they graduate and the ideas that they have to just continue to evolve and improve this profession.
I love that they're thinking about wanting and needing to get paid because we're in it for the income as much as the outcome and
Listen, I know. I tell them all the time, I'm like, if I wanted to do something out of the goodness of my heart, I would volunteer at the Salvation Army. Like, this is my profession. Like, we're all licensed professionals here, and we deserve to get paid just like every other industry. And we cannot rely on social workers to work out of the goodness of their hearts because that's just not sustainable. Obviously, we all have our reasons why we're in this field because we care deeply about people, but we can't justify that and cause us to not be paid fairly. So I care a lot about like salary negotiation. I talk a lot about that with my students too. But yeah, we need to get paid.
absolutely. So what exactly is ecotherapy and talk about how did you guys started?
Yeah, yeah. I think I have to start by sharing that when I was in graduate school, I had never heard of ecotherapy. Like I didn't know what that was. That term was too like super unfamiliar to me. And so like I mentioned before, I've always been interested in nature, and I don't think it's outside of common sense to know that people's bodies feel good when we are outside, when we're in the presence of trees, when they're presence of bodies of water. A lot of people name that as sort of like our space where we feel at peace or we feel relaxed. But it wasn't outside of my own discovery. I actually came across a podcast that's based in Australia of somebody who practices ecotherapy. And I was like, wait a second, like there's some mental health tie between nature and offering therapy outdoors and incorporating nature into mental health treatment. Like, what is that about? Because I had never heard of that before. But the term ecotherapy itself is a bit of an umbrella term that really captures any type of practice that centers one's relationship with nature and how that can be used to support your health, your physical health, your spiritual health, your mental health. Um, and sometimes when people think of ecotherapy, they only think of like walk and talk sessions. There's this
Mm,
sort of evolving field of the expansion of walk and talk sessions where more and more clinicians are taking their clients outside to move together, to go for a walk while you're having your session. And oftentimes, if that is happening outside, that's a bit of like a piece of ecotherapy. But I've learned through a professional development training that I've done, and even through books that I've read and articles that I've read, that ecotherapy is much deeper than just walking outside. It's connected to helping one to deepen their relationship with nature in order to understand deeper parts of their own spiritual wellness. And there's some other pieces of that fall in the umbrella of ecotherapy, like some people might be familiar with forest bathing. Have you heard that term before?
No, I haven't.
It's a little bit like when I first discovered it, I was like, this sounds like some like hippy dippy white people in New Hampshire or something. Like, I don't know. Like that's for somebody else. That's not for me. Like forest bathing, like what is this? But that's another practice. It's actually not rooted in um uh like American or even Eurocentric practices. It's something that's rooted in Asian indigenous culture of spending time outside amongst trees, being
Mm,
able to reap the benefits of feeling cleansed by nature. Um, there's also pieces of things like aromatherapy or animal assisted therapy, equine therapy, dog centered therapy. Some people might have heard of like wilderness therapy, where people like go out into the woods and like detox, or children who have behavioral concerns might go to like a wilderness therapy program. Those are all sort of under the umbrella of ecotherapy that really, again, are tying in pieces of nature into health treatment. And so that's where sort of the term has evolved and came from. But as a field, it's evolving. And even though the term is very much an umbrella term, there's not like a, oh, I do this thing and then I'm an ecotherapist. It's a little more broad than having structured like licenses or certifications even that constitute what is ecotherapy. But the term itself is an umbrella term.
so there is no certification. Like so you're saying there's no certification for it? Like, is it take the certification however many weeks or whatever? I'm an ecotherapist. There's no such thing.
No, unfortunately, no. Like people use that term and call themselves ecotherapists with a humongous different range of experiences and backgrounds. There's more and more professional trainings that sort of consolidate some of the history of ecotherapy, some of the pieces of it, and offer it to folks to have certifications in different forms and levels of ecotherapy. One of which I did myself. There's a program that's based out in California, actually. It's called the Earth Body Institute, and they offer it's a 12-week ecotherapy certification program. Um, I wish I had found one on the East Coast, to be honest with you, because I was like, California, like that's the only one I can find. But the field is so new and evolving that there's not a lot of folks who are offering, at least in the United States, that are offering ecotherapy training. Um, and that program was really helpful for me to just have a bit of a framework to understand about ecotherapy a little bit more.
Mhm.
Um, so I do have my level 1 certification according to that school and that program in ecotherapy. But there's sort of programs across the world that offer similar types of training. And I will also mention that in my own discovery of ecotherapy and the research that I've done, the articles that I've read, the podcasts that I've listened to, ecotherapy is much, much, much more common in Europe and Australia.
Mhm.
Most of the content that I find is all like in Australia. I think they've been doing outdoor sessions and they have been using nature as a really common sort of medium of providing mental health treatment. And so I think we have a lot to learn from what people are doing around the world around being able to think about nature in this way. So in the United States, I think it's something that's slow to evolve. And part
Like
of
everything else.
Yes, sir. And part of me knows that that is because we are very sort of married to the medical model of care in
Mhm.
America. And we also, I think love like even the fact that ecotherapy doesn't have a formalized license process. Like people don't take that seriously here. People say like, oh, unless you have like a license, then I'm not going to talk to you or I'm not going to legitimize what you're doing. And so ecotherapy in a lot of ways is challenging some of the norms of treatment in a way that I think that larger society and culture might not accept because of what we're used to. We're used to facilitating therapy in the confines of an office or in an
Mm-hmm.
indoor space that is confidential, that is, protected based off of the way that we've learned that treatment can be provided. But I think what's refreshing to me as I learn about ecotherapy is that we can think outside of the literal box of therapy and really coming back down to what is it that people need to be able to heal holistically. And like I mentioned before, most of the clients who I support have marginalized identities, right? Like they're not upper class white people. They are people who have a range of other identities that oftentimes are not um, sort of how and who we're designing mental health treatment for.
Right.
And so I think I've always been interested in thinking of non-traditional ways of providing mental health healing and treatment to folks. And ecotherapy offers that in really special ways.
Cool. No, I know you use the word sustainability, and like we talked briefly about, the new administration coming in and anti anti climate and climate denier and everything that's been happening in California, just throughout the world, and like even the globe as a whole. Just
Mm,
the temperature is increasing, and you got like the glaciers on the other side of the world, like
mm,
ice melting. It's just where I live in Delaware by the beaches, like they're trying to prevent like the land from being underwater, and so like is is ecotherapy going to be going to be around, like you mentioned, is like an umbrella of different things, but like like for somebody like 5 years from now, or like the MSW students that you're currently serving, will they be able to use that to a point that it
mm,
could become eventually be a certification here in America, or be like I'm
mm,
I'm an ecotherapist, and this is what I do. Would
mhm.
you think that would be in existence?
That's such a good question. I think my first reaction and my take, again, I even to this day like struggle to feel proud to say like, yes, I'm an ecotherapist and I know everything about ecotherapy because I myself am still learning a lot about what this sort of branch of our field can offer. But it makes me think of a couple of things as you mentioned that. I mean, can we just name that like eco anxiety is on the rise
Mm-hmm.
of folks having really impactful and oftentimes intense nervousness about the unpredictability about the state of our planet. And there's a lot of environmental justice organizations that are advocating very strongly to help people to understand that the reality of things like global warming are very prevalent, but also very big and very scary. And so when we think about how that impacts us mentally, of course, it's like a recipe of anxiety and depression for people who are holding just the unpredictability and feeling like there's maybe lack of autonomy or lack of control about what is happening to the planet that we call home. And in that, parts of ecotherapy address pieces of climate anxiety, helping us to really think about how our relationship with nature is so important. I would argue like more important now than it ever has been because the history of ecotherapy is interesting because sometimes people say, oh, the term ecotherapy and the way we use it in relevance to mental health treatment in modern life is relatively new. Like maybe I think it was in the 70s when the term ecotherapy was first coined. But for the entire duration of human existence, people have been leaning on nature and the land and building connection and relationship with pieces of our environment since like the deepest, farthest back indigenous practices and populations. So it's not new that we as humans have a deep alignment and connection with nature. And I think that being able to offer ecotherapy, and even in my conversations with my clients who I take outdoors and I facilitate sessions outside and lead activities that are centering analogies and memories connected to nature, my intention is in something that I'm learning about and for myself is how do we help people to not just deepen their relationship with nature, but gain a deeper appreciation and respect for nature that I think
Mm-hmm.
has been lost. that's been lost in this age of like convenience and technology and
Mm,
like what is cool and trendy and like futuristic oftentimes like is not green, right?
yeah.
And I think that part of my hope in the evolution of the field of ecotherapy is that it can help people to come back to some of the things that our ancestors practiced around having respect for land and viewing our relationship with land similar to our relationship with other humans. And sometimes when we talk about this, it feels like a little woo woo, or it feels like, oh, that's for like indigenous people who,
Mm,
have their rituals and habits around maybe worshiping pieces of land. But to me, we have to show respect for land if land is going to show respect for us. And I think that there's moments that happen in our environment, moments that happen in our history, moments that are happening right now. You mentioned the
mm.
fires in California that are in a way like a clear reflection of just disrespect of land is what I believe. And I think that being able to have more continuity and connection and respect and parallel existence with pieces of nature, like trees, like bodies of water. As we do that and we cultivate how good that feels, my hope is that will make people more motivated to do things like recycle their stuff or
Mhm.
be involved with climate advocacy organizations and just be listening to what nature is telling us. Because even outside of like research, which there's so much powerful research about the benefits of nature to humans, but also research around the harmful and scary parts of climate change, that I think is really important for people to be informed about, because we can't just ignore it or deny it away because it's happening and it's revealing itself every day. But to me, being able to be honest about those conversations rather than to hide them or deny them or ignore them can be really important. And what better way than to be outside and spend more time in nature and participate in therapy outside.
No, I like that. So it leads me the respecting of the land, and so I I think of housing and how much of a shortage it is here in America, and where I live at, it was primarily farmland, and obviously the farmers, they sell the land, or they get bought out, or whatever the local state government does here, and I'm sure not only in the state I live at, but throughout the country. And they build land, build communities, build houses, like, so how it's almost like a catch 22. Like, yes, we want to respect the land because obviously there's like, we see sinkholes through, like in New York, and we see it in Florida, and we see like in other places, and like the land, like the earth is like telling us like, don't do this. And we see like the all these hurricanes that's happened in recent years, like worst case scenario, hurricanes, like in Houston years ago, and then obviously Katrina in New Orleans, and Maria in Puerto Rico that they're still recuperating, and even like New York City years ago with Hurricane Sandy that came through, and so worst case scenario stuff is happening at the same time. Like, we gotta like, you know housing, and so we need to like build this land, and like we're like drilling into the earth, like in order to build. So like, how can like we deal with that conflict? Yes, we need housing because people need the housing, especially
Right.
the homelessness and everything else that goes
Mm,
into social justice related to housing, at the same time protecting our our land, and actually build the crops, as people starting to want to
mhm,
live like healthier now. And we see more and more
mm,
stuff that's happening in terms of cancer in our food, and like
mm,
pesticides,
mm,
and everything. And now they want to put labels on alcohol, some like causes cancer now.
mm,
So like,
mm.
how can like how can we solve this conflict that
Oh,
the government doesn't want to talk about, or refuses to talk about?
wow. I mean, I love that you're asking this question, but Baz, how dare you ask a loaded question like that? We got 5 minutes left. I'm like, I could talk about this for hours. Like, you were touching on some really, really strong points around what is it that we need as a society? Because we need a lot. And I think that there's a lot of pieces of our current structure of how things have been built and designed in America that are not working, related to housing, related to food, related to access to outdoors. And so I'm not sure where to start answering your question, mostly because we are very limited on time. But I love that you posed that question. And even I imagine for people who are listening in to this conversation, those are really important, thought-provoking questions that all of us should be asking ourselves, what role that we play? And sort of tying it back to ecotherapy a little bit here, something that I one activity that I facilitate with folks, just to give a little sneak peek about like how ecotherapy activities might look. One activity that I really love is to invite people to think about a sensation when they experience the sense of awe, like that word awe, like AWE, awe.
Mm,
And awe is defined in those moments when you are in a space where your breath is just taken away because maybe you're viewing a beautiful night sky of stars that are bright and vibrant more than you ever seen, and your breath is kind of like, oh my God. Or maybe you're at like you're looking across a lake and it's just so beautiful the way the colors hit in the water and the way that things are interacting, and it just takes your breath away. And what's powerful about the sensation of awe, and there's a lot of really interesting research around mental health and how the sensation of awe can be really healthy for people to experience. Because what it does is it helps us to remember that we are small and that we, in comparison to the like grandiose large parts of the world, that we are really, really small, and that can be humbling. That can also be kind of scary sometimes. But that
mm,
sensation is really, really healthy for us to experience because it helps us to sort of zoom out and remember that we are just a small part of something much larger. And it helps us to sort of decenter some like pieces of selfishness or pieces of how easy it is to be self-centered and feel like what we're existing is only us, and that we're the only ones, and that we're alone, and that we can't handle what's ahead of us. But when we experience awe, we're reminded that things are so much bigger than what's right in front of us, and it can help us to be able to zoom out in a really powerful way. Um, I wish that people who were in charge of housing development and in charge of food decisions experience the sensation of awe more often, because I think it would draw and drive the way we make choices around just holding respect for the beautiful sensation, and being able to consider how that's going to impact nature, not just tomorrow, not just next year, but long term. And I think that's something that we just fail to do, of really being thoughtful and speaking to people who are experts around environmental influence when we think about bulldozing forests to build housing. Yes, like in theory, that's important because people need a shelter, but how we can do that thoughtfully, how we can do that in a way that's going to be sustainable to our air quality, to our access to food, to our wellness and our well-being, is not often considered, when people are making decisions around things like housing and infrastructure. And I dream of the day where that is more considered, and it needs to be if we're going to preserve the planet that we call home.
gotcha. Where can people reach out to you?
Great question. My personal life, my private practice is called Liberated Light Counseling. So you can find me at liberatedlightcounseling.com. I don't have an Instagram page for that yet. I haven't like built a social media platform for my practice yet. Maybe one day I will. But my Instagram handle is at Elise's Pieces. So you can find me on Instagram if you want to connect with me there. You can also shoot me an email. My email is Elise, ALIESE, at liberatedlightcounseling.com if you want to talk more about ecotherapy. If anyone is practicing ecotherapy and wants to connect with me, I'm on a mission to build a network of other people who are practicing ecotherapy so that we can learn from each other. I don't know very many people in the New England, Boston area who are practicing ecotherapy, and I would love to meet more. And so if you're listening to this and that is you, please reach out to me. But it was a huge pleasure to be here. Like I said, you did the thing. We tease about it in social work. We call it a doorknob comment, where you're like walking out the door and you're like, hey, by the way, like I got all this other stuff. let's just I'll see you later. So you hit me with the doorknob comment over there, boss, but maybe another time we could get more into some of these conversations because they're really, really important.
Yeah, we might have to do a part two down the road.
Maybe a part two could be cool.